Here. Commissioner Carbajal.
Here.
Commissioner Cummings.
Here.
Commissioner Gates.
Here.
Commissioner Gilzine.
Here.
Commissioner Grant.
Here.
Commissioner Lesnoff.
Here.
Commissioner Meggs.
Here.
Commissioner Waldman.
Here.
We have a quorum present.
Thank you. Commissioner Cummings, would you be so kind as to lead us in a pledge of allegiance?
Pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We're going to go ahead and make some preliminary announcements. The Leon County Commission graciously lets us use their facilities, so please respect their rules and have no food or beverage other than water in the room. Please silence your telephone, your cell phone. Anyone addressing the commission, please speak up so our recording equipment can pick you up properly. Fellow commissioners, please speak up and into the microphone so you can be heard. And members who are operating in special circumstances, I will ask that you be as brief and concise as possible in your questions and comments. Pursuant to Florida law, members of the public have the opportunity to input on matters before the commission, other than in cases in which we act in quasi-judicial capacity. This means the public can have input on matters other than complaints, opinions, determinations on financial disclosure cases. If you desire to be heard on a matter, please speak out, speak your heart, and give to Ms. Fulford, who has her in, there she is. Thank you. Very good. Our first item is approval of our meeting on March 5th minutes. Do I have a motion?
Move approve.
Commissioner Meggs, we move to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second from Commissioner Ankers. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Show that those minutes approved. Okay, the first item on our agenda is consideration of a final action from recommended order from DOA in the case of Dustin Daniels. Will the parties or their counsel please identify themselves for the record?
It's Jennifer Bloom for the respondent, Dustin Daniels.
Elizabeth Miller, advocate for the commission.
Madam Chairperson, as disclosed during the probable cause case, I know both the respondent and the complainant did not work with them, have no conflicts of interest, so I will proceed in the case. Just wanted to disclose those things.
Okay, thank you. We have before us the recommended order of the administrative law judge for the Division of Administrative Hearings and complaint number 18-168, N. Ray Dustin Daniels, recommending that the commission enter a final order finding that the respondent violated the misuse of public position statute, section 112-313, parent 6, Florida statute, and that he be subject to a fine of $250. The advocate timely filed an exception to the recommended order, which she subsequently withdrew, and the respondent has timely filed the exception. We have received a copy of the transcript and exhibits from the hearing and from the record of the hearing, which we all have reviewed, and a memorandum and draft order have been prepared by our staff for our consideration. We will hear from the advocate and from the respondent, each with a 10-minute time limit, with the advocate going first and having the option of reserving some of her time for rebuttal. We must proceed under the Administrative Procedures Act. This means we are unable to reject or modify a finding of fact unless we determine that there is no competent substantial evidence to support the finding. If we reject or modify a conclusion of law, we must find that our substituted conclusion of law is as reasonable or more reasonable than that made by the administrative law judge. And it means we may decrease or increase the judge's recommended penalty only upon a review of the complete record stating with particularity or reasons for such a reduction or increase, and citing to the record in support of the increase or decrease. And with that, we will go ahead and hear from the advocate. You are recognized, Ms. Miller.
Elizabeth Miller, advocate for the commission. I request that the commission adopt the ALJ's finding in its recommended order in its entirety. Thank you.
Are there questions for Ms. Miller? I have a question. You had submitted an exception and then withdrew that exception. Can you go into that for us, the reasons for your withdrawal?
Yes, ma'am. Upon second thought, I decided that maybe I should accept the ALJ's wisdom in this case. He and I obviously see the case entirely different. And I decided maybe he's the better, well, definitely the better arbitrator, but maybe I should accept his view of the case.
Are there other questions of Ms. Miller? Would the respondent like to make a statement?
Good morning, again, it's Jennifer Bloom for the respondent. Thank you all for having us here. And I agree with the advocate on this, and I ask that you adopt the recommendation of staff and adopt the ALJ's order in entirety.
Are there questions of the respondent? Do you need time for rebuttal, Ms. Miller?
No, thank you.
I'm going to, is there any comments from the executive director?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just briefly, as you have read, there are certain requirements under the Administrative Procedure Act, Chapter 120 Florida statutes, the part to deal with an agency's review of a recommended order. It's almost impossible to change a finding of fact. It's less difficult to change a conclusion in the law. Also, an agency does have the ability to increase or decrease a penalty recommended by an administrative law judge if it is articulated reasons for the increase or decrease, and if there are citations to the record in that discussion that would support the increase or the decrease. The way that this matter is postured, there's no need to change the finding of fact of the administrative law judge. There's no need to change the conclusion of law. The judge did in fact find that the respondent violated the law as he was charged. The issue was whether he violated subsection 6, and the ALJ found that he did. Now, the penalty in this matter is merely a monetary penalty recommended by the judge of $250. Possible penalties that are available in a case of this nature, which is one where the respondent is no longer in their public position, but what they were found to have violated, the violation occurred when they were in their public position. The possible penalties are limited to a monetary fine, a maximum amount of $10,000, and or public censure and reprimand. Under the Administrative Procedure Act, the commission can increase the penalty if they feel like $250 without a public censure and reprimand is too paltry of a penalty for a violation of an intentional statute. That is up to the commission. The draft final order that you were presented in this case is just a draft vehicle that follows on the heels of the posture of the recommended order. In the context of there being no live exception by the advocate. But there's no requirement that there be an exception for you to do something different than is recommended by the administrative law judge, especially in regard to penalty, if you desire to do so. But if you do not wish to accept the administrative law judge's order in full and you want to adjust the penalty, there would have to be reasons articulated for that adjustment, and there would have to be a citations to the record to support that. In other words, You don't really need to worry about finding the fact or conclusions of law here. The advocate has won the case in that a violation has been found by the administrative law judge. The only question is, does the commission think that a mere monetary fine of $250 in the context of an intentional statute that requires wrongful intent, if that is enough or not? And if it feels like that's okay, then it would accept the order in full, but it's perfectly fine for the commission to discuss, and if so, to articulate reasons for an increase or theoretically a decrease, as long as there is a reasons articulated and citation to the record.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Is there, Commissioner Gaines?
A question, Madam Chair.
Sir?
Mr. Executive Director, and perhaps the advocate as well, could you take us inside this case so that we would understand what reasons, if any, the ALJ gave for the size penalty that is recommended, compared to, if appropriate, any precedents or similar cases that you might be able to recall or cite, so that we could understand where the ALJ was coming from, perhaps why we took exception, notwithstanding the fact that the exception was withdrawn, and then how that compares to the way that we or the ORDOA has handled similar cases in the past as to penalties.
Thank you. If I might, through the chair. Commissioner, on that, quite a few of your cases involve this particular statute, the misuse of public position. In fact, more complaints are filed under that statute than any other provision of the Code of Ethics. The resolution of cases under that statute most frequently takes the posture of a settlement stipulation, but they do go to trial fairly frequently and come back as a recommended order. Over the years, to my recollection, the majority of cases involving this misuse statute have, whether they were settled or whether they were tried in front of an administrative law judge, have included a public censure and reprimand as one of the sanctions or one of the penalties that the commission has found and recommended to the governor for imposition. The advocate might want to speak briefly about the particulars of what she thinks about a couple of precedents, but things that the advocate had mentioned to the administrative law judge were cases involving this statute. One was, the respondent's name was Robinson, and he was a local government attorney who basically engineered a new position for himself and his law firm through his manipulation of a public meeting, what he did and didn't say, and he had, I believe, a public censure reprimand in addition to other penalties. Fairly recently, you had a case not involving this statute, but involving one that really doesn't have a wrongful intent type element to it. It's more of a strict liability thing, the anti-nepotism law, where a city commissioner was involved in a vote of her collegial body to elevate her relative to a higher position. And the administrative law judge there only recommended the $1. I think y'all remember that one from the city of Midway. And the commission took issue with that and said, you know, $1 is a joke here, and you put a $500 penalty on the person. They appealed to the District Court of Appeal, and Mr. Zilkowski successfully handled that, and the DCA upheld their decision to go from $1 to $500 in a case that didn't even involve an intentional element, as this current case does. But the short answer is that most subsection 6 violations over the years have included a public censure and reprimand, not just a monetary fine. I think what the ALJ was doing here is there's often different ways where you can articulate a charge against somebody. One is to say, as is typically the case with this statute, what's alleged is that the person violated the misuse statute. And then you get into the minutia of the proof. And in this case, there were like over 100 emails or something that were sent allegedly by the respondent, and for private purposes, allegedly through a public email system that belonged to the city of Tallahassee. And the administrative law judge, rather than looking at it as did he misuse his public position to use a public email for political and partisan purposes, the ALJ chose to look in his view that there was only proof that one email transgressed the law and the other other emails had public purposes or hybrid purposes. So the many emails were not determined to be violative, and the ALJ focused on one email. Nevertheless, his focus, even in his own order, particularly paragraph 47, talks about how that shouldn't have been done, that was a misuse. And I don't personally think that the fact that there were a lot of emails issued and only one turned out to be the factual basis of the misuse negates the fact that there was in fact misuse of a public email account for a partisan purpose. But I think the ALJ was lining up numbers, and that has something to do with what he thinks is only a monetary fine penalty to be appropriate, and only 250 when the maximum is 10,000, and this commission has sought, even more in its legislative recommendations. But public censure and reprimand is probably not appropriate for somebody that leaves off an address on a financial disclosure form like the case, you had earlier. But this is the intentional statute, the one that goes to wrongful conduct, the one that mirrors the constitutional provision that the people overwhelmingly passed recently. This is the wrongdoing. And I think the ALJ just was stacking up numbers, and frankly, I don't know if that's really appropriate when this statute is being dealt with, but not to go beyond what you asked me. The short answer is that public censure and reprimand is common when this statute is at issue.
Madam Chair,
Yes, and then Commissioner Anchor.
I'm sorry, I yield.
Well, similar to Commissioner Gates, my understanding of the ALJ's rationale for distinguishing this case in terms of the accelerated and increased penalties we would have preferred was that he was relying on a couple of cases in which the penalties were much higher, but the offense was one in which the public official had gotten some sort of increased salary or higher compensation or severance package. And that was really the reason, is that right, Ms. Miller, that this lower penalty was imposed, 250 rather than the 10,000 we would have preferred. And so my question is, if Mr. Anderson or one of the former legislators might be able to respond, is are we in a situation outside of this case that if we ever want to get on track of being able to impose higher penalties, that we have to legislate around this kind of a finding that says, if it's really not to do with higher compensation or a better severance package, you're never going to get a higher penalty. So I've seen in my own law practice situations, and I know all the lawyers have, where the court came and issued a ruling, the legislature didn't like it, so of course the legislature legislates around that judicial conclusion. So my question is, for Mr. Anderson or the former legislators, are we going to have to try to legislate around this finding in order to get beyond his recommendations that it has to be higher compensation or severance in order to get a higher penalty?
You call it one line through the chair. The macro thing that you're speaking to is one issue. Another is this particular case. And the APA, the Administrative Procedure Act, essentially allows for the final order authority, which in this case is the commission, to look at different reasoning than the ALJ looked at when it comes to penalty. You can't really change the fact findings, and it's hard to change their legal conclusions, but not impossible. But you can have an alternative reasoning and articulate things. You can find that this is serious enough and articulate reasons for it to go higher. Just because the ALJ in a case-by-case sense latches on to what he or she thinks is pertinent to the penalty recommendation, it still just is a recommendation from an administrative law judge under a statute that gives them far less power to carry the day with their penalty recommendation than they can with their findings of fact. And that's on after this case. Now, on the bigger issue about the legislative round, it is somewhat incongruous to, go to the legislature with a package for inflation-adjusted maximum penalties, which are now at $10,000, and at the same time adjudicate a misuse of public position case for a mere $250 fine without public censure and reprimand. I think that when you start lobbying and arguing and presenting the need for higher penalties, one question that might be asked by the legislature, as they do on everything when they do their research, is what is the existing state of affairs? If they haven't used all the ammo in their ammo can, do they really need another bomb? And so, higher penalties only become real statutorily if the lesser penalties have kind of been exhausted. And this is almost at the bottom of the current $10,000 limit for money. And I think even more important than money, I mean, personally, I'm not a huge believer that monetary fines are the best thing for offenses, criminal or otherwise, that involve mens rea, but rather it's accountability, and it's a taking to the woodshed, if you will, publicly in the public interest of somebody that has intentionally violated a statute that is not anything that you can prove into, like failing to put an address down for a creditor. This is something you got to know about, and with the existing case law, which the ALJ was well aware of, these things are not found lightly. And it's a very heavy burden, which the advocate carried here successfully, to have a violation found. But it seems to me to almost be a mockery of that very hard exercise, and then saying, oh, by the way, no public censure and reprimand, and write a $250 check, cost of doing business, there we go. But in the micro, I think your reasoning can be articulated different from the ALJ. You're allowed to do that under the law. You're allowed to have a different penalty if you desire. And in the macro, it does not seem realistic to ask the legislature about penalties when it's at $10,000 now, and here it's just $250 on this one if you didn't change anything.
And just so you're aware, at my direction, I have asked staff to look at some of those particulars from the record, if the commission wants to consider a change in the penalty, and I'm ready to transfer the gavel and offer that at the appropriate time. Commissioner Gates.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Executive Director, in your opinion, the current law, without it having to be amended by the legislature, does allow us, if we choose to find reasons to exact a different and more stringent penalty than the one that the ALJ has recommended. Is that correct?
Through the chair, yes, sir. The Administrative Procedure Act does allow you to do that, but it has to be stated on the record reasons for the increase, and there has to be citation to parts of the record, like parts of the transcript, parts of the exhibits, parts of the recommended order of the ALJ that would support that reasoning. But if that twofold requirement is met, articulation of reasons and citation to the record, then the Administrative Procedure Act does allow you to increase it, but you can't just increase it without doing those two things.
And to follow up, Madam Chair, and I'm certainly prepared to support a motion that would be buttressed by that evidence and those citations. And I would agree with Mr. Anderson when talking with people in the legislative branch about increasing penalties, which was part of our legislative agenda. That very statement was handed back to me. Well, how many times have you used a $10,000 penalty? How many times have you used a $5,000 penalty? And our answers to those questions were shallow. Because we use we have very light penalties. I'm not saying we're wrong. I'm just saying there is no real argument for increasing penalties as we have asked the legislature to do if we're not bumping up against it. Now, maybe we shouldn't. Maybe the cases that come before us don't require increased penalties. But if they don't, then we ought not to be asking the legislature to do what we don't need. But Madam Chair, I would certainly yield to whatever you have prepared.
Thank you, Commissioner Gates. Commissioner Mannix.
After reviewing this case, I don't know if these are legitimate reasons to up the penalty. One is I don't like it. It doesn't seem fair and it doesn't seem consistent with what we've done. If those are reasons, which they're probably not, but I just don't think this is the right fine. I don't know if it does any good to reprimand somebody who's not in office anymore. But certainly the fine seems to be minimal, and it's almost, in my opinion, a mockery of what we're here about.
I would agree. I'd like to hear if there are other comments from other commissioners, and then we can discuss the motion which I prepared to make, and I've got citations to the record. In fact, I did want to ask, I think our respondent had made a presentation. I don't know if I asked if people had questions of the respondent. Are there any other comments from other commissioners? Otherwise, I sense from the commission that we want to pursue an avenue that increases.
May I make a comment on that?
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to say that I understand your discussion on penalty, but you also have to look at each case as whether not all subsection 6 violations are on the same level. What we're talking about here is sending one improper email. And I just want to, that is what the ALJ took into consideration is in most 6 cases, they are substantially greater violations than what was in this case. Also, in the past, there have been, when there have been more minimal subsection 6 violations where the penalties were low. And that, so I think that this is consistent with what has happened in the past, like the Enright Kinzer case and the O'Neill case. So I do just want to say that there has been consistency in cases like this where the severity is just not quite on the level of some of the other subsection 6.
Thank you. My motion was to keep the monetary penalty but add the public censure and reprimand. If, however, I am prepared to increase the penalty as well, I'll make some remarks before I pass the gavel. To me, part of what alarmed me in reading this case was the position of this individual was one of great import and substance to the rest of the staff in the city of Tallahassee. He's the chief of staff, a sophisticated position, a supervisory position, a position that sets the example for the rest of the staff of the city. It is someone who knowingly did this and is not, let's say, a lower level clerk or someone who does not have that level of sophistication. And for us to allow this penalty sends a message that sanctioning for crossing a very, very significant line between what is public work and what is political work should not happen and should not be taken lightly. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the gavel to Commissioner Grant and see if they'll take over for us.
Commissioner Lesnoff, having described, would you please restate the motion for everybody?
Yes, I have not made it yet. I'm glad the motion is to increase the penalty to allow for the $250 fine and for a public censure and reprimand. And the reasons that I would cite for that is that the finding in paragraph 52 and 71 of the recommended order of the ALJ finding in paragraph 47 that a person in the respondent's high position in city government sending of emails by public means for partisan purpose violated the law. These findings, which are part of the record in this matter pursuant to 120.57, parent 1, parent F, Florida statutes are reasons for increasing the penalty in this matter. Specifically, in paragraph 47 of the recommended order, The ALJ states, the undersigned finds Mr. Daniels' justification for this email to be less than credible. A person of Mr. Daniels' position, the chief of staff to the mayor of a large Florida city, should know that sending an advertisement for a partisan fundraiser to contacts and constituents from a public email was inconsistent with the performance of his public duties and would be violative of Florida law. Additional reasons for increasing the penalty in this matter beyond a mere pocket change or cost of doing business of a fine of $250 are sections 112, 311 Florida statutes, which provide the purpose of the standards of conduct and the code of ethics that the ALJ has found that the respondent violated are to protect the integrity of government, to prevent the use of public position for private gain, to promote public interest, and to maintain the respect of the people in their government. Furthermore, section 112, 313, parent 6, which is found to have been violated by the respondent, is not merely a strict liability or status offense requiring no actual affirmative wrongdoing. Rather, it is an offense requiring intentional conduct. As such, it is more serious against the public trust and one more fitting of a penalty of public censure and in addition to a dollars and cents fine. Penalties of many prior matters before this commission involving violation of that section have included public censure and reprimand. This is not a case of inadvertent error by a low-ranked file public employee. It is intentional wrongdoing conduct by a high-ranking government official for private purpose. Further citations to the record in this matter justifying an increase in the penalty are page 50 of the DOA Joint Exhibit 7, where the respondent admitted that he was had the final decision on the content sent out in mass emails, again affirming he was the individual who approved and sent out these emails and acknowledged that the Florida fundraiser email was not appropriate email and should not have been sent by the mayor's office. Page 177 of the DOA's transcript, volume 2, the respondent admitted that he was the administrator of the program. He put together the flyers and send out the programs, and that he was the boss. And so for those reasons, I think the record clearly states a very clear intent. This was not inadvertent. He was a very high-ranking official, and the purpose of the law is to, is part of our duty is to help maintain public integrity in our code of ethics. And I think we do a disservice by not increasing this penalty. And that is my reasoning and motion.
All right, Commissioner, you've heard the motion and the explanation by Commissioner Lesnoff. We have a second to that motion. Senator Gates, you made the second. Now, is there any discussion?
Mr. Chair, just for clarification, the motion is $250 for the dollar damages, but increased to add public censure and reprimand.
That is, and I am open to an amendment that would increase the penalty if the commission so desires.
Or does anybody want to make an amendment to the amendment regarding increasing the amount? Commissioner Gates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would ask Commissioner Lesnoff if she would consider this to be a friendly amendment. If it is, then I'll offer it, and that would be an amendment to increase the penalty to $1,000.
I would consider that friendly.
Then I offer that amendment, sir.
We can do this one of two ways. We can have a second to the amendment and vote on it, or if that's agreeable, because Commissioner Lesnoff, that would be incorporated into the motion.
That is fine. That is I will amend my motion to be $1,000 penalty and a public censure and reprimand, and that would be that Commissioner.
So we already have a second to that. Is there further discussion? Any member of the commission?
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Wall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Certainly support the motion, but I have a question. Do you think 1,000 is really sufficient? I mean, this is, you're talking about public trust here. Right. Somebody what they did is to use their public position in a way that is against the law. And to me, 1,000 is, I mean, it's a lot of money, but it's not a lot under the circumstances. I think you have to really send a message, and as Commissioner Akers talked about before, when we want to go to the legislature and say, hey, we need to increase our finding ability, they're going to look and they're going to say, well, look at this, something like this, instance, only went to $1,000. So why should we bump you up at all? So I don't have a figure in mind, but throwing it out there that I think that this is something that would probably require a higher fine than $1,000.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Bessie?
I'm also with Commissioner Wallman as well. So if the opportunity presents itself to offer an amendment to the motion, I would say the maximum fine under law.
Which is $10,000.
Absolutely.
Do you want to make that as a motion, an amendment to the motion?
If it's a friendly motion amendment, if the two parties who've already started to accept it, I will definitely go with it as well.
I concur with the,
Go ahead. I'm sure we're about to say the same thing, so just go ahead.
I concur with the notion that the violation of public trust is paramount. I concur that potentially a higher penalty may be warranted. I would also note that we have reserved a $10,000 penalty for some of the most egregious cases that have come before the commission. I'm not sure I view this to be in the same category as some of the things that the commission may have found at a high penalty, which were tantamount to actual theft. I also believe that ultimately our actions may or may not be final here. They can go further. This can be appealed, and so I have a little bit of discomfort at the $10,000 level, only because of precedent and actions where we've had so much less penalty for what may be a lot more egregious behavior when we penalize at the $5,000 or $10,000 level. So that's.
Okay, so that is, we do not have an amendment to the motion. Commissioner Gilsey, do you wish to make a $10,000 motion?
Looking around, the 10,000 is not gonna fly, but I'm willing to come up with a number that, because I do agree with Commissioner Wallman, I think $1,000. So if there's another number out there, I'm willing to do that.
7,500.
Well, we are setting the minimum fine. This minimum is zero, $250 minimum. And the figure of 10,000 has been mentioned. Would there be an agreement to split the difference at 5,000? Commissioner Nix?
I would recommend 7,500.
7,500 it is.
Commissioner Akers?
Didn't we recommend 5,000 initially? Wasn't, I
1,000.
see that. I'm looking for some confirmation. It seems odd that at this point we would ask for more than we originally did. That, I would not want to exceed what our original request was.
And
It may ask Ms. Miller, is that appropriate?
Yes, ma'am. In my proposed recommended order, I recommended a $5,000 fine and a public censure and reprimand.
So it just, to me, would be awkward in the wrong direction. It's one thing to increase it from what the ALJ did, but another thing to go beyond what I think the advocate recommended initially.
I think it also, with your permission, Mr. Chair, I think it also raises the issue, we must be respectful that we cannot change the finding of fact, and we are not challenging the conclusion of law. So what is coming back to us is something less than what we had put forth to the administrative law judge. What we are being asked to make sanction on is one violative email. And unless we're going to change conclusions of law, we cannot change conclusions of fact. We're now dealing with somewhat of a more limited scope.
Commissioners, discussion.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Gates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Executive Director, as you look at the range of decisions that ALJs make, as you look at how the courts have handled appeals, what do you think the market will bear? Do you believe, I'm with Mr. Meggs, Commissioner Meggs, that notwithstanding the fact that there's a finding here related to one email, the one email is reflective of an attitude and an act that violates the public trust in a serious way. So I'd be happy to support Commissioner Meggs' motion, but do you believe the market would bear going back to the 5,000 that we originally recommended? And if so, if that's Commissioner Gelzin's desire, I'll be happy to second that motion or that amendment. But I'm wondering if you just give us a little market analysis.
Thank you, if I might, through the vice chair. I think it's very significant to have public censure and reprimand here. In terms of the money, 1,000 is significantly more than 250. Of course, it's not 7,500, it's not 5,000, it's not 1,000. When things are done by an agency and if and when they're reviewed by an appellate court, there's legal technicalities and issues that are looked at, and then there's the reality gut check thing about the whole situation. And I think you've got a good record here to substantiate public censure and reprimand, and a good record here to substantiate a $1,000 fine. I think the more you go up with the dollars, though, the more the market might not bear it above here in review. Again, that's just sort of a gut check, gut analysis on my part.
Further questions? Commissioner Gelzine, your motion is before us.
My motion.
Well, no, we have another motion.
I'm sorry?
You did not accept the increase of the fine.
I did to 1,000, we never disclosed that motion.
And does someone want to make a motion to increase, this would be an amendment to the amendment, to increase the fine from $1,000 to another higher amount?
I don't, but may I make one comment?
Commissioner Akers.
I want to thank Commissioner Lesnoff for working ahead with staff to get the justifications and the record citations, because sometimes when I've been presented with this kind of a recommended order, I'm very reticent to try to modify it because of the requirements that it takes, and I feel like we're always putting everybody at a disadvantage to do that on the fly. And so it's an example to me to try to get that done in advance so that we can more meaningfully accomplish what we seek to, but it takes homework in advance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Though I think it should be higher than 1,000, I respect what the executive director has said and how it is, and I think we have to be consistent with other matters. And perhaps in the future, we'll look at trying to step up the fining that we do. But in this instance, I support the motion the way it is right now with $1,000.
All right, further discussion or a further motion to the amendment? Hearing none, then the motion, Commissioner Lesnoff, as she has accepted the friendly additions, is now before us. Is there any further discussion before we have a vote?
For clarification purposes, that means $1,000 and public censure and reprimand.
Yes.
Thank you.
If I might, Mr. Vice Chair, if I might comment briefly. Just for clarity here, what would be happening is the motion would be to accept the findings of fact of the administrative law judge, accept the conclusions of law of the administrative law judge, but increase the penalty from $250 to $1,000 plus public censure and reprimand.
Thank you for the explanation. Further comments or questions of commissioners?
And our next vote, Mr. Chair, I apologize. The next vote would be to accept the amendment and not on final passage, right?
No, we're back to the amendment. She accepted the suggestions and amended them.
But we're voting on the amendment first. I just want to make sure that there's opportunity for discussion and debate after the amendment passes or fails.
Okay, good. All right, any further, all right, all in favor?
I'm not sure what we're voting on now.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to clarify.
Don't we have an amended motion before us, Mr. Chairman?
Well, not really, she really amended her motion to accept the suggestions that were made, and that is now in her motion. So don't have an amendment to her amendment.
Correct. Parliamentary inquiry then, Mr. Chair. We are voting on the Lesnoff motion as she has accepted the friendly amendment.
That's correct.
Thank you.
So now's the time for discussion. This would be the final vote.
Yes, the amendment was seconded by Commissioner Gates, and it is now before us.
Commissioner May.
I thought Commissioner Gilzine made a motion.
No, I withdrew.
Oh, you withdrew that?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay.
Yes, sir.
All in favor of Commissioner Lesnoff's amendment? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? So it passes. So that would take us back to the final vote as amended. Is there a discussion as to the final action as amended, Commissioner Rankin?
At the risk of frustrating and complicating everybody, it's my understanding, and I think the consensus of the commission, that what we just voted on was the amended motion that, and there are no other amendments on the floor. The amended motion was to have a $1,000 fine with the public censure and reprimand, and that was just voted on without any additional discussion. So I think we've disposed of this matter. I don't think we have any supplemental votes required.
Okay. I think actually technically we had an amendment to the report because the amendment only dealt with the end of the report that dealt with reprimand and the $1,000 action. I think we need a vote now to vote for the entire report as amended. Mr. Executive Director, you
If I might, through the vice chair, what I think you just did, and I think if you restate it again by consensus here is what you have done is you've accepted the findings of fact of the administrative law judge, you have accepted the conclusions of law of the administrative law judge, but you have, for the reasons articulated in this record today in this discussion, increased the penalty from a $250 fine to a $1,000 fine plus public censure and reprimand. In other words, everything the ALJ found you haven't accepted, except you modified this penalty by upping the money to $1,000 and adding public censure and reprimand. And I think you've already done that parliamentary, by the way, that you voted. I wouldn't claim to be an expert on that, but I think that's the consensus. If you would all agree with that, I think the record would be clear.
okay. Does anybody feel that we need to have a further vote on this matter? All right, then consider it opposed of. That will take us to the next matter, which is under comments.
Thank you for taking the proceedings, Commissioner, and we are now on to item number 5, consideration of final action and stipulation of parties here.
No one is present.
No one present for this, okay? We have before us a proposed stipulation between the commission advocate and the respondent in case 18-047 and Ray Yorkine. After considering all the materials and presentation of the parties, the commission may vote to approve or reject stipulation. Complainants have the right to comment in writing on proposed stipulations. We have not received any comment on this proposed stipulation. Ms. Miller, you are recognized.
Thank you. Elizabeth Miller, advocate for the commission. The respondent served as the Indian River County Assistant Fire Chief. And in that position, he was authorized to use the city money, or excuse me, the county money to buy tires for the various vehicles that the county owned. What he did was he would buy tires and resell them at 100% profit to himself, that he would be using the county's money to do that. He made a significant profit, about $300,000. He's currently serving a 12-year sentence in prison, and after he gets out, he will serve 18 months of probation. He's in prison for first-degree grand theft. He was ordered to pay restitution totaling $3,602. He signed a joint stipulation admitting the facts, and I'm recommending public censure and reprimand in this case. I request that you approve the stipulation. Thank you.
Are there questions for Ms. Miller, Commissioner Carvajal, then Commissioner Meggs, Commissioner Walton? Did you have your hand up?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to clarify, since we are in the public portion, I'll refer to the prior case. Is the violation that is referenced in, for example, 112-313 sub 6 the same as the previous case we just discussed?
It's the same violation, yes, sir.
And
Same statute.
for a follow-up question, just to make sure, this stipulation only imposes censure even though there's a clear finding that there was pecuniary gain and illegal activity?
Absolutely, yes, sir. He was ordered to pay restitution, as I said. Furthermore, he's in prison for 12 years, and I don't anticipate he'll be able to pay any fine during that time.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Meggs?
I wrote down that he was on 18 years probation, and you said 18 months, I think.
I'm so sorry, 18 years.
I
Yes,
just wanted you to know I was
12 years
listening.
in prison. Yes, 18 years probation.
Are there other questions for the advocate? Is there discussion of the joint stipulation? Commissioner Carvajal?
Madam Chair, only because of the prior conversation we just had about making sure that we enforce the highest penalties possible. I just want to highlight that there are mitigating circumstances here. For example, the finding of grand theft and the prison time. And I don't find this as an inconsistent action, given that there are other actions that have already been done. I don't want in any way to implicate any other decisions that this commission has or may make in the future. There are serious penalties that have already been attached. This was a stipulation, and I appreciate the advocate clarifying those things earlier.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the matter? Is there a motion?
I move the acceptance of the joint stipulation.
Commissioner Walden moves the accepting of the joint stipulation. Is there a second? Second by Commissioner Cummings. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Show the joint stipulation approved. Our next matter is in case 19-158 in Ray Pardee. Will the parties of the council please identify themselves for the record?
Mark Murray, legal counsel for Respondent Thomas Hardy.
Melody Hadley, Commission Advocate.
Very well. After considering, we have a proposed stipulation between the commission advocate and the respondent. After considering all the materials and presentation of the parties, the commission may vote to approve or reject the stipulation. Complainants have the right to comment in writing on the proposed stipulation. We have not received any comment on the proposed stipulation. Ms. Hadley, you're recognized.
Respondent served as the supervisor of elections for Madison County. He is no longer in office. He violated section 112.3136 by using his position to arrange for the issuance and or receiving salary advances above and beyond the statutorily mandated salary of county supervisors of elections. Respondent has reimbursed those salary advances. We ask the commission to accept the stipulation that he violated section 112.3136 and impose a total civil penalty of $8,000 and issue public censure and reprimand. The civil penalty is $4,000 more than this last stipulation that was presented to you at the last meeting during pre-probable cause.
Thank you, Ms. Hadley. Are there questions of the advocate? With the respondents, counsel.
Madam Chair.
I am so sorry. Commissioner Gates.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We had an extensive conversation about this case at our last meeting, and I don't mean that we should have to cover all of that ground, but just for the record, where did $8,000 come from?
It was just an agreement between the two parties when we started discussing where the respondent was comfortable and where I was comfortable. And we decided we were both comfortable at that number to present it to the commission.
Madam Chair, if I don't mean to be pejorative here, but having been in the room with the rest of us at the last meeting, what gave you comfort at $8,000?
Because I've had cases that went to the Division of Administrative Hearings where this one would go if the commission were to reject the stipulation. I've had a previous case where Renee Leaf, who was a county attorney, received salary or an increase in her salary that she wasn't supposed to. The Division of Administrative Hearings did a $5,000 fine and public censure and reprimand. There's been another case, Stephen Carter, similar, received salary he wasn't supposed to. The Division of Administrative Hearings did 0 in public censure and reprimand, and the commission ended up issuing the fine. So recognizing what we would get at the Division of Administrative Hearings, recognizing that I've had cases where we spent $5,000 in court fees, I recognize that $8,000 would be an appropriate number considering those considerations.
Madam Chair, and of course, if it did go to if we imposed a fine which the respondent did not choose to pay, and went to the Division of Administrative Hearings, respondent as well would have all sorts of legal fees and court costs, correct?
I can assume, I don't know whether the respondent would be required to pay his attorney's fees, but the state assumes court reporter fees, subpoena fees, deposition fees regarding transcripts and whatnot. The state pays for that.
Be one of the first attorneys to appear before DOA pro bono, but it's possible.
And that has happened, so.
And just a final question, Madam Chair. Commissioner Meigs, at the last meeting when this matter was taken up, I think I'm sure if I stated wrong, he'll correct me. It indicated that there might be some possibility or should be some possibility of perhaps referring this back to the criminal justice folks. Did I misunderstand you, Commissioner? Is that your feeling? And if so, could we do that?
I think that unless the statute of limitations is run, which I don't think it has, I think it's 5 years after you leave office for the statute of limitations. I think it could be referred back, but that should be the Department of Law Enforcement's choice.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I've got a question, staff. Is coming to a conclusion and making a referral to state attorney mutually exclusive? I mean, when there's a suggestion, this is a civil ethics matter, there's, if there is any question as well, that there may be, again, a criminal matter.
If I might, Madam Chair, on that, one of the implications of this coming to us as a referral from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement rather than as a complaint filing is that they, being a criminal justice agency, looked at it and thought it should come our way rather than go for a criminal prosecution. But there's nothing that really prohibits the commission from taking action in its civil administrative sphere here on a settlement and then communicating, to a state attorney's office or back to FDLE that, we've done our work. Again, you have your role. It's up to you what you want to do or not do. I think they are well aware of this dynamic and this person. And it seems like if they were going to prosecute it criminally, they already would have. But the short answer is that if we act today on the stipulation, that's a separate thing from any criminal prosecution that may or may not be had. I don't think what we do today would bar the criminal justice authorities. I think they've already kind of taken themselves out of it by knowing about it and sending it our way without anybody being criminally prosecuted so far.
Commissioner Furlong.
As a follow-up, not being an attorney, executive director, what I understand are that there are some stipulations that are being agreed to in this in this recommended order. Those would be available to any law enforcement agency after this or anybody else who wanted to pursue things. Is that correct?
If I might, through the chair, I'm not prepared to say, I know these stipulations classically, and this one I think says it, that if the stipulation is rejected by this body, this commission, then any admission or any content of that stipulation will not be used against the respondent for any purpose. So I think that's standard language. But if the stipulation is accepted in terms of issue determination that might be available to in a criminal prosecution, that's probably a matter for the criminal authorities and the defense lawyer and motions and rulings by the trial judge. I don't know the answer to that. I think they probably feel like that they're fairly safe criminally, and then they're not going to have anything they say in this to really hurt them, or else they wouldn't put their name to it and they wouldn't be offering it for acceptance.
Are there other questions of the advocate? Would the respondent counsel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're just, we're hopeful that the commission will appreciate and take into consideration the hard work that we've done with the advocate to resolve the case and to reach resolution. Yes, Mr. Hardy has been cooperative. He did not challenge even at the pre-public cost. We tried to come up with a negotiated settlement, and it is a significant penalty that's being imposed. We would ask that you accept the stipulation.
Are there questions of the respondent's counsel? Commissioner Furlong.
Just to clarify, and I apologize for not remembering this, is Mr. Hardy in office or holding any other public office at the moment?
No, sir, he is not.
Any other questions? Thank you, sir. Discussion on the joint stipulation. Is there further discussion on the joint stipulation? Is there a motion?
Mr. Madam Chair,
Commissioner Gates?
I promise not to plow all the ground here, but just to remind us that this is somebody who took money that didn't belong to him, took money from a small county, $16,000. When you take money from the public treasury that does not belong to you, that's stealing. And whether you say you're borrowing against future payroll that you might get is an excuse. This individual was supervisor of elections, pretty key position in the public trust. He didn't own up to the fact that he was taking this money that didn't belong to him at all until the Auditor General caught him. And then, of course, he owned up because it was right there in front of him and everybody else. This case has some time frame issues associated with it. From the time that these offenses were committed until the last meeting of this commission, when we took up the settlement proposal, 3 presidents of the United States have been in office. We can't quite cover ourselves with glory about how quickly we moved this matter. We allowed this person to leave office and without taking the matter up, apparently for maybe good reason we didn't take it up. But the person left office, so now and not being a public official, they don't really have the penalty of a public censure or reprimand being as poignant or as meaningful as it would have been if this matter would have been taken up in a more timely fashion. All of that being said, I'll have a hard time going back to the legislature next year and ask for an increase in penalties for this commission if stealing public money, $16,000 and change from a small county as a constitutional officer of the state of Florida is not met with a maximum punishment. Probably have to deputize somebody else to speak to the legislature in favor of increased penalties other than me. So with deep respect to the advocate's work, understanding what she has said, and I took counsel with the executive director before this meeting and listening to his wisdom that if we go to above $8,000, we might not be sustained by the courts. There got some very distinguished lawyers on this commission. I'm not one, but sometimes you have to do the right thing and let the judge do the wrong thing, let the judge own it. And so I'll vote against the advocate's recommendation on it because I think it's a matter of principle. And I appreciate the opportunity to make my position clear, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. There's no motion before us right now, so we'll have discussion, and then if you may want to make a motion to reject, we can certainly entertain. Commissioner Anchor.
Mr. Anderson, given that you're just the Wikipedia of the Ethics Commission and can answer these questions rapid fire, do you know whether we have ever had a joint stipulation for the maximum of $10,000?
Through the chair, I cannot recall that we have. I can't swear that there has not been one, but the maximum penalty here for a person in this posture is only public censure and reprimand coupled with a $10,000 fine. And so by analogy, that's the maximum, and you don't really get people stipulating to the electric chair. They tend to stipulate life in prison because it's a little bit less than what the max is. And if the max is 10 and the money is 8, and there's public censure and reprimand in the context of the settlement, that's I think reasonable within the notion of settlement. It might not be reasonable if there had been a trial and there had been a finding, then maybe 10 would be better, but this is in a negotiated posture. and there's negotiations all day long, you know, in criminal and civil matters, and there's give and take, and there's nothing directly within the penalties that the respondent would be achieving for his compliance in his settlement if he didn't get a little bit of a reduction there, and 8 is pretty close to 10. I think in the context of a settlement, this is not unreasonable. But I can't remember whether or not we've ever put 10 on anybody with a stipulation. I do not know off the top of my head.
Thanks. So I share your frustration and concern. That was really well articulated at the last meeting, and I think spoke to all of our sense of principle. And it may have been about this time that Commissioner Megg said he was more confused than a gnat in a yo-yo or something like that, that I'll never forget. But revisiting that, when we left this issue under fairly intense discussion last time, and some amount of drama, it felt like, I don't think we gave any specific direction to the advocate or to the respondent about what we expected, other than it needs to be more. So I would feel somewhat like it is unfair to the negotiation process not to have given more guidance if in the end we were going to expect the maximum amount. And the reason that I asked a question about the historic amounts that joint stipulations have addressed is because I do think to some extent we are buying a resolution. Just like anybody who settles a case before it goes to trial, you are shaving off some of the expenses that it would be otherwise incurred to the state. And frankly, that's where those $2,000 are going. It's just to pay savings of those resources. And so I can justify that principle, just like I can that we have probably doubled whatever previous penalty was. And I think it's more in the interest of saving of resources and early resolution that we have not gone to the maximum penalty, which we would otherwise be entitled to do and justified in doing if we further along in this process than we are. So for that reason, I'll support the joint stipulation.
Is there any other discussion on the joint stipulation, Commissioner May?
You know, I think I will support this. I have a question though. Is it possible that the commission could, because this was referred to by the Department of Law Enforcement to the state attorney, and I know the chairman kind of chastised me the other day for mentioning the state attorney that rejected this is currently in jail. And there's a new state attorney over there. Could we possibly accept this and then the commission in the form of a letter write FDLE and say, you may want to consider resubmitting this for criminal prosecution?
If I might through the chair, I can't think of the part of the statute right now, but it is in the code that the commission can communicate with the prosecutorial authority if we think there's been an indication of a violation of criminal law. And Steve, you or Caroline, correct me if I'm wrong about that, but I think we can communicate that, you know, to them, it would be up to them. It wouldn't be like we would be doing it, like the legislature a few years ago made it real clear that the commission cannot do admonitions or admonishment letters beyond the penalties that are in the statute to embarrass people and that kind of thing, which is not what we'd be doing here. This would be a communication back to the FDLE, and they'll get a copy of what you do if you accept this, but we certainly can call and or write them and tell them what happened and remind them that they are a criminal justice agency and they may want to communicate with the state attorney's office in that circuit. There's nothing wrong with that kind of communication coming from your staff here after this matter is over if you accept the settlement.
Madam Chair, question to Commissioner Meggs. Would it be, because you may be bringing me back across the line here, would it be a communication from this commission to the state attorney, the new state attorney, as well as FDLE?
I would suggest we make it back to FDLE. It's just suggesting they may want to revisit this as a criminal prosecution.
Well, if that were part of the if that were part of the motion that came before us, I could vote for that. I could vote for it on that basis.
Any other discussion? Maybe we're getting close to the motion. Commissioner Walton?
Thank you, Madam Chair, but I think if we did that, then we're not accepting the joint stipulation. We're actually changing the terms of it, and it's no longer jointly stipulated to. You know, I agree that maybe it'd be nice to get more money from it, but the whole concept behind the stipulation is to resolve it, put finality to the issue. And in this instance, we authorized our staff to negotiate. And I think we should not undermine our staff who undertakes to do what we've directed and comes back with a recommended order. I think that's our recommended stipulation. I think we ought to respect that, and along the lines of what we talked about before in other cases that we've done. I think we have to follow precedent. We have to follow the direction that we've given our staff. So for that matter, while it'd be nice to refer this out, maybe that's fine, and anybody here can refer it out. It doesn't take the commission to do it. So if it's appropriate, I'd just like to make a motion that's a clean motion.
I have a comment, and because I want to be clear of some understanding here. It was based on what our executive director said. I think the issue of this joint stipulation is separate from the idea of making an independent statement of communication on a potential criminal matter. If I'm wrong, just, straighten me out.
If I might, through the chair, in regard to that, I think it should be kept clean. That is, I think the stipulation should be either accepted or rejected. But the statute in the commission code here, 112.324, subsection 9, Florida statutes in the code of ethics says, in addition to reporting its findings to the proper disciplinary body or official, and that would be the normal communication if the stipulation is accepted, the report would be to the governor to impose the penalty. That in addition to that, the commission shall report these findings to the state attorney or any other appropriate official or agency having authority to initiate prosecution when violation of criminal law is indicated. So there's a separate statutory authorization to report things to the criminal folks, but that would be, I think you ought to do that separately after you accept the stipulation or reject it, but it's statutorily provided for to make such a communication.
Okay, so we could entertain motion on the stipulation one way or another, and then entertain a motion with respect to the commission communicating back to the state attorney. Okay, very good. Commissioner Carl.
A clarification and then a point for discussion, if you don't mind. I noticed that this is from a referring agent, and this is not the example that we came across recently, that this is the first time it happened, right? This is a normal process that existed prior to this year, is that right?
Would you say that one more time, please, sir?
Earlier in this year, calendar year, we have debated referring agents, and there's a law change. This is not referring to the new law change, right? FDLE has always been able to refer directly to us.
If I might, through the chair. In terms of the referral, which is a parallel process to a complaint action, but they're very similar, it hasn't been around that long, maybe about 10 years.
Okay.
But FDLE is, in addition to the state attorney, a U.S. attorney, or the governor, those are the four entities that can refer a matter to us. And this referral came from FDLE, not from the state attorney, not from the U.S. attorney, not from the governor.
Okay, thank you. Then, if you don't mind for just discussion. While I greatly appreciate the passion and the point that Commissioner Gates is making, particularly cognizant of the fact of his leadership on Amendment 12 and the strengthening of Florida's Constitution on issues related to ethics, I do think that the stipulation process should somewhat be honored, even though I know the advocates are well aware that we have rejected their stipulations on several cases, even while I've been on, and that's only been 2.5 years. When we think that there are insufficiencies, most of those times, if I remember correctly, is that the individual was still thumbing their nose at the commission in particular, and that we did not believe that a message was being communicated, and not that our advocates were insufficient in assessing the cases. So that I'm just providing that as kind of context, at least from the time that I've been on. I'm interested in supporting potentially the stipulation because it will move us on. And the reason I was asking the question incidentally of the referring, I don't know if we have a normal policy of just closing the loop with whomever referred to us so that they can, without any additional motions, just be aware of what the possibilities are for them. So, thank you.
Commissioner Akers?
Would you entertain a motion?
I was going to ask for any final comments and then look for motion. Any final comments? Again, have a motion.
I would like to first move that the commission refer this matter for further criminal investigation.
Second.
Motion from Commissioner Anchor, second from Commissioner Gates, to refer the matter to the appropriate criminal justice entity for re-review. Any discussion?
If I might, Madam Chair?
Yeah.
I would think that a good way to do that would be to a letter addressed to FDLE with a copy of that letter to the state attorney for that circuit that includes Madison County.
I would include that within my motion, that that's the appropriate process. If that were you.
Of course.
Very good. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Show that motion approved. Is there a motion regarding the joint stipulation?
I'd like to move the approval of the joint stipulation.
Is there a second?
I want to second it.
Right, got a motion from Commissioner Anchor, second from Commissioner Meigs to approve the joint stipulation. Any discussion?
Well, Commissioner Akers has brought me across the line with a brilliant parliamentary move.
Very well. Any other discussion? All in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Show the joint stipulation approved.
Coach.
Right, our next item, item 6, is consideration of advisory opinions. We have 3 on our agenda today. We will take up file number 2775, which will be presented by the illustrious Chris Anderson. Is the requester here?
No.
No. Very well. You are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Schaefer, who he's out of town on good things, not any COVID or anything bad. So anyway, he wrote it, and I'm going to present it to you orally here. But basically, the question is whether or not a person can simultaneously be on a county commission as a county commissioner and also hold the position of county surveyor in the same county, either as an independent contractor or as an employee. Now, there's some technicalities and things that are discussed in the opinion draft, but the bottom line on it is that there would seem to be, as drafted, a basic incompatibility from being on the governing board of the county, and then a member of that governing board also being the official county surveyor engaged by the county under his license, private license, or his private capacity as a state licensed person to be the county surveyor. And really, there's a lot of things they asked, a lot of writing that has to be done here in this draft, but the essence of it is that under the conflicting contractual relationship statute, 112.313(7)(a), the draft finds that there would be a problem because there would be this split of loyalty between his interest in a sense as a subordinate of the agent and his role as a member of the collegial principal that is engaged in. And while he wouldn't be getting any money, you don't have to have money to have a contractual relationship if what you're doing is being done under a professional licensure, because there's case law that says that status of acting under a professional license, for example, a land surveyor, that creates contractual privity between you and the people that you work for. Goes for other sorts of professions also. And then the voting conflict statute is sort of moot in that he's not going to be doing this because it'd be a conflict of interest to start with, whether he abstains from voting or not. So when the vote comes up, he doesn't really have a hardcore voting conflict, but it's suggested that he do abstain from the vote, that he would abstain from the vote, because in the future, he might possibly apply for it as a county commissioner, and this has to do with creating the position. I think it's too remote and speculative to say he has a hardcore voting conflict, and he's not going to vote to do something that he can't do anyway under the other statute. And so in essence, it's a pretty straightforward thing after you get through all the minutiae of the different statutes that, look, you just can't be the boss and be a person underneath the boss at the same time. I guess it's admirable that he wants to, find some old Spanish land grants or something that are 400 years old. I'm sure he could, probably a very capable man, but they probably need somebody other than a county commissioner to be the county surveyor, and that's the essence of it.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Are there questions of Mr. Anderson? Commissioner Carvajal.
Thank you. Just to clarify, all of this pivots around the fact that there would be a contract for a permanent position. Nothing would prohibit a commissioner from volunteering or even on a continuing and recurring basis for a role. Is that correct? It's really pivoting off of a contract with a formal position.
If I might, through the chair, I think the essence of this thing is that regardless of the formality of the lack of pay or the permanence, or he's the only one, I think the idea is that he should not be the county surveyor in any sense for the county, no matter the volume of his work, if he's also on the county commission. It's different than an opinion in the past where a county commissioner has had a farm and he decided to donate a load of field dirt from his farm to the county for the county road, that kind of thing. This is the idea that you cannot effectively be a county commissioner evaluating the work of the county surveyor and things attendant to that. If you're also the county surveyor, in other words, you cannot evaluate yourself. And the nature of his unpaid or continuous status or exclusive status is not nearly as relevant as the fact that he has the two hats he's wearing, evaluator and evaluatee. That's the incompatibility, not the structure of the way he's postured as a surveyor.
Madam Chair, for follow-up, thank you. But my question really becomes, would we accidentally be putting other people at risk who occasionally have expertise and would stand up to do a position that currently exists? I think about, for example, CDCs that have come before us, and there has been somebody with expertise, and let's just make it as simple as mow the lawn for somebody. It's the permanence and the actual filling of the position this is pivoting off of. If somebody volunteered because the position was open and they had that expertise, we wouldn't accidentally be making that an ethics violation, would we?
If I might, through the chair, mowing the lawn, a load of field dirt, do-gooder things like that, somebody on the commission having independent expertise and able to bring something to a discussion is a different thing, I think, than putting somebody in an enumerated slot, even if it's a contractor versus an employee versus in and out versus all the time. It is somewhat of a structural thing here, but a loose structural thing Certainly, it's not the intent of this opinion to do away with loads of field dirt for free from the former county commissioner or the mowing of the lawn by a good Samaritan. But I wouldn't say, though, that we would want a county commissioner to also volunteer to be the county attorney and stand up in front of his own commission and start giving legal advice for free, even if it's infrequent. You need to kind of have that separation to promote the objectivity, which is the essence of the code of ethics, despite all the technicalities, that the desire is for objectivity and separation of function.
Madam Chair, and you went exactly to where my next example is going to be, because there's a lot of volunteer opportunities, but if a small community, for example, needed an attorney, but did not have a city or county attorney on hand, county less likely maybe, but a city, for example, might not have somebody, and a commissioner offered opinions. I understand the differentiation of the permanence, but we're not exposing, for example, a commissioner to an ethics violation if they stand in on a short-term basis in what I would call a volunteer while a position is open.
If I might, through the chair, you know, all of you bring a lot of expertise from your private lives to your jobs, and that's wonderful, and that makes the commission very effective. A number of lawyers currently sit on the commission, but they're not trying to be the advocate. They're not trying to be the general counsel. They're just bringing what they bring to the table. Some of it legal, some people have other expertise. There have been cases in the past where this commission has had to investigate matters such as whether or not the mayor, council member of a city, also was hired as the city manager. And sometimes that's been a problem under this statute and other statutes that didn't need to be as much in front and center, and this one is the one that it hinges on. And sometimes we found that in a pinch, somebody stepped in and they didn't get any extra pay, and it was under dire circumstances, and they didn't really have the two positions that would create a problem. And it was more of just it needed to be done in a small municipality or something. But there are things in this draft opinion, particularly on page 5 of the draft, that articulates some of the problems that could be rife with this dual status. That is, he could be tempted to use the influence of his position as a member of the county commission to influence how the surveying work is performed. There might be differences of opinion between the commissioner and his supervisor concerning judgments made in his position as county surveyor. And if there was a disagreement on the scope and quality of the work that he performed as county surveyor, there would at least be a temptation to use his influence as a county commissioner to affect the outcome of the disagreement. But the point being that in those other cases that we have investigated, they merited an investigation to go out there on the ground to see if there really was a problem, or if it was just the Dutch boy plugging a hole in the dike and nobody else could do it at that time, and it had to be done. This is something up front. It's a structural or semi-structural thing that's being asked about. It would have some permanency to it, but I don't think permanency is the key. The key is the two hats and the lack of objectivity.
Are there any other questions regarding this advisory opinion? Is there a motion?
Move we approve.
Commissioner Meggs moves to approve, Commissioner Gates second. Any discussion on the advisory opinion, further discussion? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Show the advisory opinion approved. Next, we will have file 2778. Will be presented by Mr. Zolkowski. Is the requester here? No. You're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This opinion was requested by Lynn Gellin, the city attorney for the city of Delray Beach. Shelley Petrolia is she's been a member of the city commission of the city of Delray Beach for about 6 years, and she's currently serving as the city's mayor. Additionally, in October of 2020, she joined the board of directors of Delray Medical Center, which is a hospital in the city. The mayor receives no compensation for her service on that board, the board of the hospital. On May 7th of 2020, the city manager contracted with Delray Medical Center to purchase COVID-19 lab testing services for homebound residents of the city and for employees of the city's police force and fire rescue. Since the start of that contract, approximately 150 to 200 individuals have been served with lab testing by the hospital under the contract. And the total value paid by the city for the contract has been $14,000. The contract is due to be renewed in May of this year. And because there's still a need for COVID-19 testing, the city wants to renew that contract. The city has asked whether the contract renewal would create a prohibited conflict of interest for the mayor. As the draft points out, there would be no conflict of interest under section 112.313 subsection 7A, but there would be a conflict on the face of section 112.313 subsection 3 unless the mayor can benefit from an exemption. The draft stands for the proposition that an exemption found in section 112.313 subsection 12D applies in this instance. Subsection 12D says that no person shall be held in violation of subsection 3 or subsection 12 if an emergency purchase or contract which would otherwise violate a provision of subsection 3 or subsection 7 must be made in order to protect health, safety, or welfare of the citizens of the state or any political subdivision thereof. As far as my research could tell, the last time this commission substantively considered applying the health, safety, or welfare exception was in 1992, 29 years ago. And the last time this commission applied the exception to negate a conflict was in the last quarter of 1983, 37 years ago. In the draft, I cite some of those opinions to explain how the exception has been applied historically. And there are three elements to look for when applying this exception. There must be an emergency. The proposed purchase must be made to protect the health, safety, or welfare of the citizens of the state or of a political subdivision thereof. The purchase must be reasonably necessitated by the emergency. The first element is that there must be an emergency, and in the situation before you today, I submit that there's a clear emergency. Aside from all of our individual experiences with the COVID-19 pandemic, and the statistics that I cite in the draft about the contagion, the state of Florida and the city of Delray Beach are both operating under and have been operating under a state of emergency relating to the COVID-19 pandemic. The second element is that the purchase is made to protect the health, safety, or welfare of the citizenry. And by now, we're all acutely aware of the aggressive education campaigns undertaken by state, federal, and local health authorities to alert people that COVID-19 screenings and testing are essential for combating the COVID-19 pandemic. In the draft, for example, I allude to undertakings by the CDC in that regard. It is because COVID-19 testing protects the public that the city of Delray Beach has made the purchase of the COVID-19 testing from Delray Medical Center. And for that reason, the draft indicates that the second element should be present. Lastly, the third element is that the purchase is reasonably necessitated by the emergency. The CDC recommends that testing and rapid screenings are an effective means of curbing the transmission of COVID-19. There's no reason to believe that in the absence of a COVID-19 pandemic that anybody would be attempting to purchase COVID-19 testing, including the city of Delray Beach. And it's because that there is a pandemic that these purchases are being made and that the contract is sought to be renewed. With these reasons in mind, the draft concludes that the health, safety, or welfare exception is applicable to the mayor and that it operates to negate the conflict of interest that she would otherwise have under section 112.313 subsection 3. I present this draft for your consideration. I'm available to answer any questions about it that you may have.
Thank you so much. Are there questions, Mr. Zukowski? Is there discussion on the opinion? Is there a motion regarding the opinion?
Move the adoption of the proposed opinion.
Second.
A motion from Commissioner Bankers with a second from Commissioner Wallman to adopt the advisory opinion. Any final words before we take a vote? Commissioner Furlong.
I didn't ask any questions on this, but I do believe that it's properly constructed, but the moral hazard could potentially be if the contract is written in such a way that it automatically renews for COVID items. The mayor would have had this one-time exception, and there is the possibility that bad actions would be taken, because even after the emergency, there may be likely a need for COVID-19 testing kits. So we're out of the point where we can get all this, but I do believe it's properly constructed. We've given the right advice. I didn't want to put our staff attorney in an awkward position of having to make an opinion on such a theoretical situation, but I wanted it on the record that we're basically standing up and assuming that both the hospital and the mayor are going to do all the right things in this case.
So noted, and I think it's a good observation. Any other comments? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, show the motion to adopt the advisory opinion is approved. We'll move on to file 2779. Mr. Polkowski, you are recognized again.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. Commissioners, Meredith Abel is a member of the City Council of the City of Temple Terrace, and she's requested an opinion in this matter. Ms. Abel was elected to the City Council in November of 2020, so just recently. And in addition to being a newly elected City Councilor, she is also a karate instructor. And she teaches karate in a handful of settings, different settings around the city, where students typically pay her a tuition to receive her karate instruction. In the past, she's used to perform the private karate instruction for compensation for children at the city's recreation center, among other places. The city has a program where they will allow qualified club leaders and activity instructors to use the space in city-owned resources, such as the recreation center, to host their gatherings. The city and the instructor will execute a contract, and the city will collect a fee on a per participant basis in exchange for use of the space. The contract also includes other things like an indemnification clause and an explanation of advertising rights. In practice, before she was elected, Ms. Abel would collect the class tuition from her students and would remit those fees that were due under the contract to the city on a monthly basis. Since then, she has stopped teaching karate at the recreation center, pending an opinion from this commission. Ms. Abel wants to resume teaching karate at the recreation center. A lot of parents have gotten in touch with her to ask her to come back and teach their students, their kids. To do this, though, she would still need to contract with the city for the use of the space. She is proposing that she will, if she engages in this endeavor, she will accept no tuition from her recreation center students, and to satisfy the terms of the contract, the students will pay their fees directly to the recreation center on behalf of the city. Ms. Abel also proposes that she will not charge the recreation center students, that she will just charge them cost, for equipment, gear, uniforms, and belt testing. She will earn no profit margin on those items. Because she'll be receiving no tuition from the students and charging them cost for the gear and the equipment, her classes at the recreation center will result in no profit to her. Ms. Abel asks whether the proposed arrangement would result in a conflict of interest for her, and the draft finds that unless Ms. Abel has an exception available to her, she would have a conflict of interest under section 112.313 subsection 7A. She'd have a conflict because she would have employment with her karate business, which is a sole proprietorship for which she receives compensation for teaching at karate at other venues. That sole proprietorship would be doing business with the city by contracting with it to use its space. Thus, without an exception, she would have a conflict. The draft looks at two specific exemptions that did not technically apply to her situation and found that the spirit of those exemptions tended to demonstrate the reality of Ms. Abel's situation, which was that maybe the conflict could be negated by an operation of section 112.316. The first exemption discussed in the draft is section 112.313, subsection 12F, which provides that the total amount of the transactions, when the total amount of the transactions in the aggregate between the business entity and the agency does not exceed $500 per calendar year, there will be no conflict. In practice, this is only applied in situations where the agency is purchasing less than $500 in goods and services. Here, the agency is not purchasing anything. The contract requires that Ms. Abel pay the city fees on a per student basis. Under the situation she is proposing, she will no longer be paying the city. She won't be handling any cash in that regard. The students will be paying the city directly. So the amount that she will be paying the city now goes to zero. So the exception, when read literally, is not technically available to her, but maybe you can see how she's in the ballpark of the exception and how her proposal operates in the spirit of that exception. The second exception of the draft the second exception that the draft discusses is found in section 112.313, subsection 12I. This is an exception that allows a public officer or a public employee to purchase goods or services from entities doing business with their agency when the price and terms for those goods and services are available to all similarly situated members of the general public. This exception is not technically available to Ms. Abel because she is not attempting to obtain goods or services from vendors of the city. Instead, she is attempting to contract for space from the city itself. Thus, even though the city will allow similarly situated people to teach karate at the recreation center, this exception, when literally read, will not apply to Ms. Abel. Though, again, maybe you can see how she's in the ballpark of this exception and how she is attempting to operate within the spirit of the exception. The draft concludes by saying that although these exceptions are inapplicable, the spirit of the exceptions gives rise to an operation of section 112.316 and negates the conflict of interest. I'm available to answer any questions that you have, and I present this opinion for your consideration.
Questions, commissioners? Commissioner Cardinal.
I must spend way too much time thinking about these things, but I apologize in advance. But I appreciate the spirit of the direction that we want to go, but let me just change the direction and slightly. In this case, I will put a theoretical out there. If instead of being a karate instructor, I was a financial advisor, and I was entering into the same relationship, renting space from the city, not charging for the space. People could do whatever they needed to admission fees or whatever. But the whole idea was that I was generating business for my private financial consulting in the same kind of light. People want me to present this information. And because I'm a commissioner, there may be some folks trying to endear themselves to me in any number of different ways, which they could have done by just going to my practice in any case. But it is not unusual that somebody would use a public space like a library, like a commission chamber or something like that, or something like this. How would, if we approve this, I know I'm always told by the executive director, it only applies to the case in reference, and yet I always see references to the cases in every single opinion that you all bring, so I don't understand that logic. That's a different story. If I was a financial advisor, would you have given me the exact same advice?
I'll come to your hypothetical in a hot second. In the situation before us, what we're relying on is that the total dollar amount changing hands between the public officer and the agency. It's zero. And the other thing that we're relying on is that what she is attempting to do, any other person could attempt to do, and what the benefit that she's receiving from it is not disproportionate, it's not special, it's what anybody else could do in the circumstance. If those situations were present in the situation that you propose, it might be a little bit. It could potentially be a little bit different where, as described to me, this karate business is kind of segmented. These are not, when she stopped doing this business, these are students that didn't follow her to the other venues. With the financial planning, as anybody who's investing knows you're kind of tied to the person who has your money. And so if you start the city thing and then you leave and people will come with you, now you've grown your business. That hasn't been her experience here now. I don't know if that's going to be dispositive for her. I think there's a lot of room to disagree with this draft, and that may be one of those reasons. However, I think the situation that you're proposing is slightly different on that basis.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Gates.
Thank you, Madam Chair. How much of your opinion relies upon the fact that this individual is not receiving any personal money? Would it change if there was $5 per customer or per student that was inuring to the benefit of the individual requesting the opinion?
This matter came to me not originally as a request for a formal opinion, but it came to me as a request for an informal opinion. In the informal opinion, as it originally came to me, the facts were similar to what you're proposing. She was not, initially what she was saying is that the belt testing was $50 per student, done every 3 months. The fees would come in, she would collect those, et cetera. At that point, this was a matter that could be handled by letter. I decided to call her up and tell her that under those circumstances, there would be a conflict of interest. There would be no exception available to her. A couple of weeks later, she came back to us and said, well, what if I'm just charging nothing? And I think you saw that, the email trail in the materials here. At that point, it kind of looked like there were just a lot of exceptions. There were 2 exceptions that she was darn close to, but either the transaction was going the wrong way or she's contracting with the wrong person. And it was close, but if I could have applied the exception, I would have loved to, because we want people to be able to pursue these types of business endeavors generally when it's not a conflict. If your view of the situation is that her reality creates a conflict, then employing 316 to negate this conflict is not going to be appropriate. If you think the reality of her situation as presented, where she's not earning anything, that reality is a sterile environment where she's not going to have a conflict in reality, then section 112.316 should be applied.
Madam Chair, to follow up. I don't have a point of view on the matter. I was trying to determine whether or not the line was crossed when money changed hands that would be construed as profit or as a fee for coaching services, whether that's the line.
As originally proposed to me, the amount of money that she would have been receiving was well over, I didn't ask for how much money she was making, but it was well over $500 annually. Just because we were talking about, this draws upon the spirit of the exception. The exception that we were looking at is the $500 number. So that's the number, the threshold that I was looking at. She's well under that as proposed at 0, but again, the exception technically doesn't apply. We're looking at just her reality.
Madam Chair, I'm with Commissioner Carvajal. I see these opinions then later cited and relied upon as they should be. People read these opinions in order to figure out how they might apply to their situation, where the facts might be somewhat different. I'm sorry to give you a hypothetical, but imagine instead if this person was in the business of delivering food, and so they went to all kinds of different places and businesses and delivered meals to people. And one of the places they delivered meals was to this city facility where people could come and receive their meals, but yet there was a fee. Is it the fee that gets us? Is it the absence of a fee that gives you the comfort to render the opinion that you've rendered? And would the presence of any fee for any service or any good be the line upon the line that is crossed? And if so, should that not be clear in the opinion?
The opinion doesn't draw the line. You are correct about that.
And the reason I ask is because, this is not, we're not talking about big problems here.
Yeah.
People doing karate classes, trying to help kids, that's not the corruption that we're trying to deal with in the state of Florida.
No.
But it is the reliance on opinions and the bootstrapping then that can exist, not because of what our staff would do, but because of somebody who reads it and for good or bad reasons relies upon it. So that's the point of my question.
You're right, the opinion doesn't draw the hard dollar line that you would like, and that's because the statute doesn't really.
I don't like it or dislike it. I'm asking you whether the opinion needs to.
It doesn't need to, because in this instance, it's zero. If the actual line that would disturb this commission enough to vote against it, 316, is a higher dollar amount. Anybody else who looks at this opinion would need to come to us, I think, to get, if they thought that this opinion was close to their reality. The opinions are tailored for each individual person. If somebody has something that's not zero, this opinion is talking about a $0 profit margin. I don't think this is something that we could advise somebody on the phone, even if they called us up. They'd have to get a formal opinion come before us, because those facts would be different than what's before us. The zero made me comfortable to stand before you and present this. But if there was a different number there, I don't know what I would have done given the benefit of as many weeks that I normally have to present something like this.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I would add one thing to that, which is, I know this is a weird presentation in that we're asking you to look at the spirit of these exemptions, but this is not the first time that the commission has considered something like that. There was an opinion in 2009 with a school board member who accepted employment and was an adjunct professor at a state college. And the state college had just been approved to create and charter a charter high school. So you have an instance where you have a public officer employed by an entity that is now doing business back with the agency, which is the same sort of scenario that we're talking about here. And in that instance, the opinion found that there was an exemption in subsection 15, 112.313 subsection 15, which is an exemption for individuals who are at 501c3 entities who also meet 3 other conditions. They can have an exemption from subsection 7A conflicts. And the opinion found that State College is not a 501c3 entity. In spite of that, because the other 3 conditions were met, this person was in the spirit of that exemption, and the Commission on Ethics granted the 112.316 negation of the conflict in the spirit of that waiver. So this is not the first time that something like this has been before this body, although the exceptions that we are looking at to be in the spirit of are certainly different. They're different ones.
Are there other questions? I have one. I am concerned about Commissioner Carvajal's concern about the notion of growing a business. The other is, are we setting up a mechanism by which, we have her statement that she's not going to take profit, that she's going to sell the equipment for cost. Once that is established, it becomes very difficult for someone to make an allegation that those conditions are made. It seems like we'd be setting up a mechanism by which we could do business, and only to somebody who is intimately close could we know whether there was a profit on the equipment or other things like that. So I have a concern about allowing a circumstance that makes a future complaint almost impossible in this, even in this scenario, which I agree is, kids getting karate classes, that should be a good thing, but I'm quite wary about what we're putting forth and the ability of it to be really enforced or reviewed.
You're right, and in this case, I would say 2 things about that. This opinion and this situation before us is not unlike many of the opinions that we have, where Unfortunately, it's very difficult for us to determine the compliance until somebody trips upon it and discovers it. This individual, is, in the posture of somebody asking for this opinion who has stopped teaching karate until she got the opinion. If you take any solace in that fact, and that this is not somebody who's looking to bend, I mean, maybe that's the case, but you're right. I mean, it's difficult to look behind some of these opinions after you issue them, and the opinion is held by the person who requests it, and if they are on the wrong side of the advice, then they are in all likelihood looking at a complaint if it can be discovered. You're correct about that.
Any other questions? Discussion on the opinion? Commissioner Barlow?
Thank you. And part of the discussion is figure out where we go next, because the request is for an advisory opinion, which we are supposed to give. So I'm trying to figure out how to structure the proper advice. And I know that we're in discussion. I actually had a question, and I apologize for that. Is there any reason that if this person crossed the street, literally crossed the street of this city center and just was not using the city facilities, there is no conflict in that case? Is that correct?
That's correct, and she does teach at other places.
And so, I would find more solace if, there was a case for, this is the only facility within miles, this is the population need, this is the only way to access certain places. For example, a community that might have a community center, and that's the only public space that there is for a short while. But I'm not inclined to, because of the door it opens. I actually like karate, and I'm glad that she's teaching it, but the door that is open bothers me. So while the spirit of where you were headed is cool, I just can't find myself supporting this. So I'm almost suggesting that we have to say that there is a conflict of interest. Sadly, on this particular case, only because of future cases, not because I had a problem with her. And I don't know how to properly structure that or advise you. So,
Any other discussion? Is there a motion? Okay, so clearly, Commissioner Mays.
Well, I would make the motion, and I'm making it based on that these are specific to this particular person. And I don't know that it makes any precedent for the next person to come in and cite this one. And I think you make that kind of clear in your opinion. This pertains to you and what you said you're going to do. If you do something different from that, you could be in violation. So I don't see where we've created a problem. If that is the way opinions are viewed, that they are meant for her and not meant for you. And I think we could support the opinion if that's the case. So I would move that we do.
Was that a motion, Commissioner?
Yes.
Okay, a motion to approve the advisory opinion. Is there a second on Commissioner May's motion?
Second.
Second, if modified, as, do you have a modification?
Well,
Suggested?
what Mr. May said in his motion, that it would be amended to apply to this particular person.
Well, I think that's what the law is.
Yeah.
I think that goes without saying. I thought. That's what
Commissioner, okay, so we have a motion to approve the opinion and a second discussion, Commissioner Wall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The problem is, if we think that this should only specifically be based upon the narrow exception or the understanding here, then it's of no value to anybody else. And our job really is to give people advice so that they can comply with the law. Somebody's going to look at this and they're going to read this and they're going to think, okay, well, my situation falls within this, is similar to this and that. So they're going to rely on it. Now, from a legal standpoint, we know that this only applies specifically to the one person, but people look at precedent to see how they should act and what they should do. So we're going down a very dangerous slope if we think that this only applies to one person. This applies to anybody who reads it, and we're going to also use it down the line as indicative of what this commission has chosen to do. So if you're that concerned with it being so narrow, then maybe it's not best to go forward with this.
Other discussion on the motion?
All right, Madam Chair.
Yep.
On this, as Commissioner Graves pointed out, these things inherently under the law technically only go to the person that asked for it. Now, obviously, in reality, there's reliance on precedent, so to speak, here out of these things. One reason that this is before you, front and center, is because that section 112.316 that is the reliance that Mr. Zilkowski has for coming up for a favorable result for the requester. That thing is so customized as to particular facts that as staff, we never hardly ever feel comfortable telling anybody over the phone that you don't have a conflict because of 112.316. We will tell them you don't have a conflict because your $400 sale in 1 year leads to $500 exemption. But when it comes to this sort of application under very specific facts of 112.316, which the legislature put in the code so that in the right set of facts, this commission could look beyond these hard legal elements that are in there to get the bad guy, to allow, in particular situations, the good guy, if you will, to go forward and do what they're doing without being subject to the draconian mechanical effect of the statutes. And this opinion could be buttressed at the end and at the beginning with redundant emphasis language that these facts only are what this goes to and should not be relied upon in other situations. That's been done a time or two through the years. Inherently, that's the case, but that can be expressed more. And when 112.316 is applied, it really is just that fact pattern more than some of our other statutes that are applied. And it's a reality check. I mean, you can't really analogize a 112.316 reasoning from karate in this context under these particular facts, I don't think, to something that's more pecuniary. If the pecuniary person wants to come to us, they can come to us. And another example of 112.316 being a very customized exercise is not too many months or meetings ago, y'all remember you had that water management district opinion, where you had those folks wanting to participate in that water reimbursement type agricultural thing. That met all of the elements of a conflict of interest, as does this, and very lucrative there for those people. But 112.316 was applied because under those very particular static facts that they had an intact program, state of affairs was static, they were being treated just like anybody else. This commission applied 112.316, and it's something that was much more pecuniary than what you have going on with this karate person here. And this could be, Mr. Zilkowski could buttress this at the end, at the beginning, to make it apparent, as Mr. Meggs recognized, that the law says it's just these facts only. And the financial advisor, the Meals on Wheels person that makes a living delivering, they can come back with their thing if they need to. But this really is just what it is and only what it is because of the statute issue, and that can be added at the beginning or the end to really emphasize that if it's your desire to go with what he's drafted plus some additional prophylactic language.
And if I may, we did add that, I was sent back to add that language to the Water Management District opinion.
And actually, this has that language in it, or it has a portion of that language. It doesn't, maybe it's not as much. And so maybe what we really need to do is put that on everything, because essentially that's really all we're doing. And at least let people know very clearly, you cannot rely on this.
Well, if I might through the chair, on I wouldn't say run-of-the-mill opinion, but the more often considered opinion. You're not dealing with 112.316, you're dealing with things that are more clear cut and inherently, I mean, it is useful for people to rely on these things when there's not this customized thing like you have in front of you now. There's lots of things that are analogous, and frankly, the regulated public and the commission could not operate if people were not able to rely on clear-cut, previously issued opinions that did not come to them. But we don't have people relying on these 316 opinions. That's why this one is in front of them. Is we, like Steve said, he told her no, and then come to the commission and we'll let them see it. And she adjusted her facts to make it more less pecuniary, more like anybody else that could use the facility. But there is great value in people looking at these opinions by analogy. But this particular type of opinion using 112.316, we don't encourage people to look at those by analogy, and it's good to put in those that they are what they are only on their facts. But I don't think that the normal opinion ought to necessarily scare people off from relying on it, because there's just too many situations where people are never going to call us and they need to have something to look at, or they're going to call us and there's not time to get it to the meeting and they need to know something. So I don't think that it would be good to add that to every opinion, but I think a buttressing of the insular nature of this decision in this context could be good here if you decide to adopt what he's put forward to you.
Commissioner Renz?
Well, I kind of think if we don't adopt this opinion, knowing that it is specific to this case, that we're basically saying to our person who has asked for this advice, we don't know. And so who do they ask? Ghostbusters or whomever? If we don't know, how can we expect other people to know? And so
I do think we would ultimately need to get an answer to the question. We don't need to get this answer to the question. So I think we would have to come to a resolution and respond, but if the commission is not comfortable with this response, whether as is or as amended, we do need to come up with a response. We will not say no. Commissioner Cardinal.
Thank you. I think the point the commissioner makes was just making the alternative opinion would be it is a conflict of interest, and we wouldn't go with the nuances. But in the spirit of constantly being told that there's no precedence and not punishing this person for whatever other position may be out there, I intend to support the motion because I like Brian.
Any other discussion? All right, we have a motion to approve the advisory opinion.
The question, Madam Chair, and does that motion, Commissioner Meggs, include what the executive director has said about buttressing sort of fore and aft?
that suits me.
Commissioner Grant, you agree with that too?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Very well, we have a motion to approve the advisory opinion as amended to buttress clarify that it is solely to these facts set. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. It's a no for me. Show the opinion approved. The next item of the consideration of our advisory commission, advisory committee meeting for the selection of the executive director that occurred on April 8th. So I believe those commissioners are myself, Commissioner Gates, Grant, and Gilzine, who have now called themselves 3Gs. Do I have a motion from one of those commissioners or approval of those minute meetings which were sent to us by email?
I move we approve those minutes.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Do I have a second? Motion by Commissioner Grant, second by Commissioner Gilzine. Those of the advisory commission, the committee in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
So it's approved. Our next item is consideration of number 8, which is consideration of our next executive director, and I plan to provide a verbal report. The commission opened advertisements on the legislative website, which I believe also went to Indeed.com and other places. So there's a wide advertisement over a 2-week period for that position. We had 24 respondents to the position, and on March 30th, the advisory committee met and considered who would be interviewed, evaluated the applicants, and selected 5 applicants to be interviewed. Those 5 applicants were interviewed on April 8th, and we had a very thorough interviewing process. We had a variety of people who had various backgrounds and experiences and brought very good things to the table. I did mean to say of all the 24 applicants, there was only 1 internal applicant, and that internal applicant, I think, very clearly demonstrated above all others her knowledge, her expertise, her ability, and certainly gave me extreme confidence, and I think the other commissioners on the advisory committee as well, of her being the correct choice for our next executive director, and that would be Carrie Stillman. When we interviewed, there were consistencies in what the commission was looking for. Carrie possessed the wealth of experience and background, personality, poise, ability to work with the legislature, ability to work with the commission. There was focus on legal expertise, and I think that discussion sort of brought up the issue that given that we are losing our current executive director and general counsel, that would be an issue of ensuring adequate legal representation from the commission moving forward, and the advice that we get, that's going to be an issue that we have to look at and consider carefully as we move forward. Another issue that was discussed that kind of ties into that is the focus on transition and how we were going to move as a commission with the new executive director. And so for that reason, I think we will probably need to, if we approve Ms. Stillman today, we will need to look closely about structural changes in the future to the commission staff, as well as to the replacing of some of the formal legal expertise that we have. But I must reiterate the excellent interview, the wonderful recommendations that came from Ms. Stillman, her very expert background in all things ethics in the operation of this commission, and it is our unanimous recommendation that she be selected as the executive director. I don't know if other people on the committee would like to comment at this time.
Well, I think, Commissioner, you've done a great job explaining what we did. I just want to clarify one possible inconsistency. If you looked in your agenda and you saw the letter that was signed by the executive director to everybody, that originally, as the Commissioner Chairman said, we started out with 26 and went to 8, and from 8 down to 5. And originally, we were going to pick the top 3 and rank those and put them for the commission. But after discussing all of the interviews at some length, we just didn't feel that there were any others to rank Ms. Stillman with. There were some very qualified people, but you don't put the wrong size shoe on a different size foot. And many of them brought a lot of experience of things that they had done, but not things that were particularly relevant to this commission. And one of the things that we said in the advertisement was specifically extensive experience in Florida ethics laws. We just didn't have applicants that had that kind of experience. And so our decision was that Ms. Stillman was so clearly out in front of everybody else that we wouldn't put the commission through having to decide 3 ranked people, that we would just, as the chairman has said, we would just file a unanimous report with the commission that we recommend the hiring of Ms. Stillman.
Are there any comments from the remaining members of the advisory committee?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I was able to watch, and I echo all of your comments. Had I been on the call, I would have voted the exact same way. I think that she was far and away the best candidate, and not just the best candidate, but I think that she is the best person for this position going forward. So I certainly support the committee's recommendation.
Commissioner Gates,
I yield to Commissioner Kelsey.
Commissioner Kazim.
I'll just be really brief. I'm really proud of the process. I'm glad that you allowed us to do that, Madam Chair, to ensure, knowing that we are the Commission on Ethics, and making sure that we have an open and transparency process for the selection of the next.
Thank you. Commissioner Gates.
Not for the first time, I have to say that Commissioner Meggs and Commissioner Ankers were right. Both of them told us that we had an extraordinary candidate within our family, and that candidate would, would interview well and would present well. And Commissioner Ankers made the point, which is, I believe, now going to be borne out, that if Ms. Stillman is approved by this commission, it's not because there was an inside deal or that the fix was in. It's rather that the net was thrown wide, it was thrown nationally. We had candidates who just wanted a job and moved to Florida. We had candidates who were extraordinarily well-qualified attorneys with experience which could be argued to be parallel experience to the kind of experience we're looking for. We had agency heads. We had people who, in my judgment, brought a lot to the conversation. And so I think if Ms. Stillman is approved, she now will be approved as somebody who's come through a competitive process as clearly the most qualified candidate, clearly the candidate who has the best grip on the issues and on the processes and procedures of this commission. So I want to thank you, Madam Chair, for your work in leading us through this process. I learned a great deal. Among the things I learned was that Ms. Stillman had done a study for Commissioner Rosenka, a comparative analysis of other states' ethics codes, and I want to make sure that we have a copy of that. I certainly want a copy of it. There's a lot that we can learn from what other states do, but I'm very pleased with the results that we have. And Madam Chair, if you're prepared for a motion, I have a motion.
I think we're ready to hear your motion, Commissioner.
Madam Chair, I move that the Ethics Commission approve the recommendation of the advisory committee and appoint as its next executive director our current deputy executive director, Ms. Stillman.
Second.
Second.
Second, we have a motion and a second. If I can, I would like to add to that that Ms. Stillman be compensated at the same level as our current executive director, and that she assumed the position on September 1st. Would that be acceptable to you?
Included in the motion with your permission.
Commissioner Grant.
I was just going to make a comment, and I certainly go along with the motion, obviously, but if you look at other state agencies in Florida, and you look at the compensation of the head person, we are way down the ranks. And I realize that there are some of those agencies that are much bigger than we are, but it was going to be my recommendation, if I made a motion, that we hire her at 105% of the current salary that's paid, and that would help us get up where we ought to be. Because I think our executive director is paid too little for the importance of this agency and for the work that is required. So I just make that as a suggestion. That's not an motion, but that's something I would like to see us do if there's one on commission.
Is there any further discussion on the motion? Commissioner Carbajal?
To be clear on Senator Gates' motion, right?
Correct.
Thank you. Wasn't sure if that ended up as a motion or not. So during the appointment of the last executive director, we just did a quick appointment of what was then the general counsel. I was the one who made the motion, and it was the right motion, even though I had suffered under him every so often.
We all do.
You were on the commission at that point. You remember how quickly it was. It's clear that those folks that are inside of this system will always have the greatest advantage in that. But I say all that to just say it is rightfully so. They learn not only here, they protect us, they guide us, they probably have the strongest interest of folks that in the state. I've known Carrie even before I started on the commission, and appreciate the integrity she brings to the position. And I was very excited, Madam Chair, when you all recommended for a process, because I had no doubt that she would end up with excuse me, with that same position. But the integrity outside would be maintained. The current executive director was always under the cloud of, whether he was just an inside job. So, and I think this was a good choice then. It's even a better choice now because of the process. So thank you very much for the great decision and the work that you all put in. And I did get a chance to sit through most of those interviews, and I appreciate the work that you did. It was fascinating. Love the people that you did talk to. But I think you made absolutely the right choice. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If this student would accept the appointment.
I had a private conversation with Ms. Stillman. We actually did not ask. We presumed that since she interviewed, she would accept. She was very talkative. She has ideas, and so my guess is she would. But would you? I do. All right.
So, Madam Chair,
Yes.
going back to Senator Grant's discussion item, I would like to put that as a form of a motion, a friendly amendment to the motion. If the Senate President agrees that we should look at, we should probably do it in a way where we're going to up that 105%, which would be what? What's the actual number?
I think it is 128, but may I request before we do that to actually have an examination of agency head compensation. I think that is a report that we can easily obtain and take a look at where agency heads sit and make comparisons to agencies of this size. I am not sure that given the size of the commission, whether this position is paid over the typical agency of this size, under or around the same. So what Commissioner Grant may put forward may be true, but I'm not certain of that, and I would like the opportunity before we consider a pay adjustment, which I think we would be able to do at any time, that we embark on that review.
I think that's a good idea. We have a couple more meetings before she to assume the office. And, I would just request that the staff, in case, number one, do a survey, and then number two, put it on the agenda for our next meeting.
Commissioner Minutes.
I think Chris would like us to move forward on that very rapidly.
And make it retroactive. Madam Chair,
Yes, Commissioner.
in that context, since we now have a clean motion in before us, in the context of, and I certainly wouldn't want to ever get crossways with Joanne Lesnoff on budget issues, because I've been there before and it wasn't friendly, it wasn't pretty. And I lost. And I lost.
Never.
Could we also, in that context, have a conversation about the budget of this commission?
Thank you. I think that would be an excellent idea. I think we've got to ensure, given the need to consider the absence of Mr. Anderson and the necessity to hire legal counsel, how we handle the absence of a deputy executive director. Our funds are not limited, and so as we discuss that, thank you, Commissioner Gates, I think we need to take a look at that too. But if we can go ahead, if everyone's ready, we can take a vote on the motion on Ms. Stillman's appointment as executive director, effective September 1. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Would you like to say a few things, maybe contradict Chris?
Oh, well, certainly. Somehow, I always end up here at the last, when everybody is ready to go. But I want to first and foremost just say thank you so much to Chair Lesnoff and the 3Gs, as will forever be known as now, the hiring committee who took so much care in this process. And I want to thank each and every member of this commission for the trust that you have placed in me. With this vote, it is a great honor. It's not just a great honor in my career, but it's a great honor in my life that I will be able to serve as the head of this agency and with these great people who you see in the room, some of whom I have grown up with over the years. And they're just the best people that there are. I am forever grateful and humbled by the support that my colleagues have given me over the years and through this process, and also to the former commissioners and chairs who so graciously spent time sending you letters of recommendation. I know that was very helpful in this process. So we will be transparent, we will be agile, we will work smart, and we will not let you down. I will not let you down. And so I thank you and look forward to serving you.
Very exciting stuff. Next, just to bring things down a little bit, our next items up are reports. I do not have a report. Legislative updates, Ms. Phillips.
Once again, thank you, Chair. Quickly, House Bill 853 passed the House yesterday, is in Senate messages. House Bill 1585 passed the House, I believe it was Wednesday, is also in Senate messages. Those are outlined in your written report that you have. Since that time, House Bill 7047 was put forth as a committee bill from the Pandemic and Public Emergencies Committee. It has a lot to do with pandemics and public emergencies, but there is a paragraph late in the bill that addresses a topic you addressed in CEO 20-05 last year that dealt with PSAs provided by lobbyists for certain public officials who are reporting individuals. Under the current language of the bill, PSAs would be allowed during a declared state of emergency. Those PSAs would be allowed to be done by the governor, lieutenant governor, surgeon general,
the Director of the Division of Emergency Management, the Senate President, and the Speaker of the Florida House without violating the expenditure ban and without violating the gift law. And so again, that's House Bill 7047. It's still in the committee process at this point, and so we're watching to see what happens. Absent any direction from you, we're just observing in terms of legislation. So that's the legislative report.
Thank you. Are there any questions of Ms. Stillman on legislative? Okay. Chris, can I just jump ahead since I'm sure up there to the final report, and then we'll finish up with you? Can you talk to us about our favorite subject?
E-filing, it wouldn't be a meeting without an e-filing update. Of course, we've been meeting, we had a day and a half worth of meetings, implementation downtown. This week, we are a go for launch, January 1, 2022. It'll be a great test. There's a lot of work to be done between now and then, but Form 6s will be filed electronically. We had hoped this session we might see a glitch bill with just some technical changes. We were hoping to get. It does not appear that that will happen this session, but we are working very hard to make this e-filing extravaganza. We're going to be the first state agency to launch an electronic system, and it's going to work.
Thank you. Lastly, but never leastly, we have Mr. Anderson, we have the report from the executive director.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I submitted a written report to you that you have, and I don't have anything really to add to the written report, but nothing really further on that. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll take note of the time is 1:36. And is there any other business for the commission? Any comments from any members? With that, Commissioner Waldman motions and Commissioner seconds that we adjourn. Suggestion of that motion approved.